environment, whether we're going to use CMA or just the RMX itself. Ad hoc conferences, we can go through that entry queue that we heard before, or we could use DMA to build virtual meeting rooms. That means he does builds the meeting room on demand as the call is being started. And that can be very handy and very useful, especially for large companies. DMA talks to LDAP, or Active Directory. You may have thousands upon thousands of employees. DMA can build that meeting room for every single employee on demand without the operators, without the IT staff having to do anything special. That's one of the strengths of DMA. One of the other things that we have to have is we have to have someplace to hold our meeting. Okay, a conference room. Well, usually that's the room down the hallway with lots of chairs and people sitting there. Well, in our world of video conferencing, that is going to be a logical room inside of the RMX. Okay, but we need to know how many seats are in that room. What's the speed of that room? Is there echo in that room? Do we need to handle that? Do we need to have a recording going on? All these are things that we can set up in a profile. And that profile is something the meeting room points to and says, hey, Mr. Profile, I want to record, I want to do this, I want to do this and do this. And when the time comes, let's start the meeting. Well, that meeting room can also define who's going to call out or who's going to get called in the meeting. The meeting room can be set up so that he will dial out to the individual users if you want to. That's purely up to the design of the meeting room. It doesn't have to do that. Okay. Most of the time, though, on meeting rooms, I have one inside Polycom 0572, and that meeting room is an on-demand meeting room. So if somebody wants to have a call with me, I'll send them an email. Here's my IP. Here's my meeting room number. I'll meet you at 2 o'clock in that meeting room. And then we'll just get together and make our call. I could then turn around and hit the red recording button on my remote control, and that would allow me to start a recording of my meeting, and then I could go pick that recording up later if I needed to. Now, obviously, the last thing that I need in my conference requirements are people, or the attendees, participants. I certainly have a global directory service that I can tap into and get all my entries out of my various endpoints, but that may not be the right place. Active Directory may be the place. Everybody uses Active Directory. I know, not everybody does, but a vast majority of people do. Outlook or Exchange type servers are used heavily in the industry. Not just commercial, but financial, business, small business, all the way up to military. We're all using Active Directory. Well, Active Directory gives us a way that we can tap into those people and bring them into the call fairly easily. With Microsoft, we're connecting in through their Link client nowadays, bringing them into the video calls. So Active Directory is very helpful to us, and Active Directory is fully compatible with our DMA product, which allows us to find thousands of people. We also have another directory called a guest directory where we can manually add guests to it, people that aren't part of our company, but we want to be able to call them frequently. So we'll put them in the guest directory. And of course, you always, last but not least, have people from the outside who are going to dial into your meeting. And they're typically B2B type environments where you've got business or maybe jobbers needing to call in to talk about a project or talk about a development piece. Whatever is required, they're able to connect directly into that meeting room using typically a prefix in the meeting room number, and they're in the call. Very handy. So those are my requirements. And what do we have at that point? We have a successful meeting. Now let's look just a little bit deeper at these relationships that are going on here. First of all, you heard us call into something, and that was called an entry queue. And you dial, let's say, the bridge followed by 1000, and that would put you in the English entry queue. Well, you could dial into the bridge followed by 2000, and that might put you into a Spanish entry queue, where all the queuing, rather than being in English, would be in Spanish. After that, everything else is the same, pretty much. Okay, and you could have another entry queue for Japanese or Chinese or Portuguese, whatever language you needed to have. The languages are not automatically included other than English in the RMX. only English is included. Normally those will be re-recorded by people within country to the newer languages, whatever new languages they need to have. Oftentimes you can work with your reseller to get them to do those recordings for you. Now, once I get into the RMX, I need to type in my meeting room number. And here I've listed meeting room 1001. Happens to be set up to use the default profile. Every RMX coming from Polycom has that default profile set up in it, and it's going to be a 384K call. It's going to have CIF resolution, okay, standard CIF resolution, and it will have an auto layout. Auto layout says depending on how many people sign into the meeting, he'll build the screen appropriately. He'll lay things around. And that's a standard group of layouts, and in fact the RMX will even let you tune those layouts depending on whether, sometimes when you have 5 people, we'll do the 5+1, which is the big screen and 5 people around the outside. Well, I've also seen it where they do the big screen and 5 people down the side. It's your choice. You can tell it which ones you want to be able to configure. Now that is a bridge configuration. You can't change that on the fly, but that's something that the customer can do some tweaking on. Now meeting room 1002 points to the same profile. There's no reason it can't. You can have 20 meeting rooms pointing to the same profile. Why would I do that? Well, let's say you want to give everybody their own meeting room number. That would be important because now I could go back and see how many people are using each one of these meeting rooms, looking at the CDR information, and determine how often people are using it. Maybe somebody's not using it at all. If they're not using their meeting room, do we need to re-educate them? Do we need to help them? Are they having trouble? Are they struggling with it? So you can let you do a little preventive maintenance with the folks that are actually using the bridge. Now, the next profile over was a high definition profile. Turns out nobody's using it. Nobody's configured to use it at this point, and that's fine. It'll sit out there until somebody needs it. Somebody needs to build a meeting room to point to it. Meeting room 1003. Oh, there is a difference between meeting room 1001 and 1002. It's the duration. The meeting room 1001 only lasts for an hour. At that point, it will give you notification that the call needs to terminate, and it will terminate. Meeting room 1002 will go for 2 hours. Okay? It will notify you and give you a chance to extend the meeting if you need to, or you can contact the operator at that point, and they can extend the meeting for you. Meeting room 1003 is set up for the mobile profile, for something like an iPad or an iPhone, or maybe an Android device. Now, that being said, could I use my iPad and dial into meeting room 1001 even though it's not set up for mobile? Absolutely. It'll work. It'll go in there as CIF resolution and it'll work just fine. It's just that if I go into that mobile profile, the video quality is going to be better because it's configured for standard definition. And it's also configured to run at a little higher bandwidth. Okay, 512. So the quality will be a little bit better. So, you can tweak these. You can play with them. You can have one and everybody uses it. That's just fine. But you may want to break it out and have the executives have something a little bit better. That's what that meeting room 5001's for. I call that my executive meeting room. It can go 8 hours. Yeah, they do 8-hour video calls. I've seen them. They're not much fun. But in this case, I set it up for the immersive telepresence environment. So it may have some additional parameters on layouts on the screens. In this case, I'm setting it up for a 4 meg call at 1080p. That's up to 1080p. I can set it so it has to run at 1080p. That's another parameter. But I set it saying don't go past 1080p. Of course, I don't have anything past 1080p at this point. Okay. So the other thing is auto layout, and I'm using a presenter form. That's a special capability we have in the bridge of doing primarily presentations, and other people aren't really involved. It's more of a one-way communications. I mean, we have audio communications 2 ways, but everybody watches the presenter in this situation. And there are other tunings that we can do, a lecture mode. And there are a couple other modes available out there. We also have recording set up as optional. So in the middle of the call, I could decide I need to start recording, hit the record button, and start recording. Now, I don't have to hit this record button. I could have someone go into the bridge and start the recording. I could have someone go into the RSS recorder and start the recording. So it doesn't have to be the remote control. It can be done from, I'll laughingly call it, the back end of the call. Okay? So the profiles in the RMX Manager, as I mentioned, give you some tunability, line rate, speed of the call, video quality, whether you want to use that video clarity option, whether you want to use LPR. These are all things that are checkboxes that you can include or not include in your conference. The layout, the basic layout that you want for your conference. I've used auto many, many times, but you may have a situation where you want it four-way call, and that's it. That's all the customer wants to see. It's a four-way call. No matter how many people are in the conference, they want a four-way call. I can certainly set it up that way. I can even set it up so I can tell the system who's going to be in each one of the squares. And that can be very handy, especially if you're doing calls that happen every week and people get used to Atlanta in the upper left, New York in the upper right, Chicago in the bottom left, and Miami in the bottom right. Once they get used to it, they become comfortable with it. The more comfortable they are, the more relaxed they are in a meeting, and the better the meeting will be. We do have the ability to change the backgrounds from a no background to a Polycom logoed background. We don't allow you to put your own backgrounds in at this point in time. There is discussion about it, but right now it's not an available option. Recording options, nothing more than a checkbox and linking to the appropriate recorder, and you can have multiple recorders should you need it. And IVR, and in that IVR you may tell it to add a chairperson, and that chairperson has their own password, and they have more capability than the standard user. They have the ability to bring people into the meeting, to take people out or hang them up out of the meeting. They also have the ability to mute everybody in the call if they need it. Sometimes you got to do that if people don't take mute seriously. So there are a lot of capabilities the chairperson gets, and that's all defined in the profile for the RMX itself. Now, once we set the layouts up, we have a feature called Click and View. Click and View allows me to locally, on my system, define what my layouts are going to be. It doesn't affect anyone else on the call. It's just me locally. So I can tune it for my own likings. I can make it any way I want. There are certain parameters when set in the conference or in the profile that if you set them, it disables Click and View. But generally speaking, Click and View is always available. Looking at the calendar, it's a very basic calendaring system. I believe it gives calendaring up to 52 weeks. You can have a specific conference at a specific date, or you can have a reoccurring conference if you need to. And just add them into the meetings and they'll come up and begin to run automatically. You don't have to do anything special. This is the embedded reservation system that is available in all RMX 1500, 2000, and 4000 products. There is a conference profile, and that conference profile allows us to capture the layout of the screen, the whole screen, and everywhere people are connected and how they're connected. We do this because in the immersive telepresence world, we'll have many, many sites connected in one conference. And once we get it laid out exactly the way we want it, we want to save that so we can reproduce it for next week's conference and not have to go manually putting everybody into the right squares. So once you get it the way you want it, you hit the right buttons and you actually save a conference profile. Very handy for the operators. We also have a calendaring option that's available by connecting us to a Microsoft Exchange server. This is very handy in that it talks to Outlook, okay, and allows Outlook to schedule the conference in the RMX. Okay, it's a plug-in, and you add it to your Outlook. Outlook then, that plug-in talks to the RMX, setting up a scheduled conference. One of the other features that this gives us is the ability with a checkbox to say either stream the conference or record the conference automatically. That's very handy for those people who can't make the conference. They can go back to the invite for the conference, and there'll actually be a link to where the recording is so they can watch the conference